Good morning. This is Arvind. In this session, we will discuss about functions. After going through this session, you should be able to understand about functions, function components, parameter passing, passing arrays to the functions, storage classes, and recursive functions. In this session, we will discuss about functions, types of functions, categories of functions, and partially about parameter passing. In the next session, we will discuss about parameter passing with examples, passing arrays to functions, storage classes, and recursive function. Now, let us see what is a function. It is difficult to develop a large program even though the algorithm is available. To develop such a large program and to make it easy, we need to divide it into a number of independent units so that we can easily design, implement, and manage. So the process of dividing this large program into smaller units and designing them independently is called modular programming. Larger programs are more prone to errors, and it is difficult to locate and isolate errors. A repeated group of instructions in the program can be grouped as a function so that it can be invoked instead of having the same piece of code whenever it is required. A program can be used for solving simple problems or large complex problems. Programs can be solved if they are very simple. We can easily solve the programs which are very easy. Whereas if they are complex problems, then it is difficult to understand the steps involved in it. Hence, the bigger program is subdivided into a number of smaller programs called subprograms or modules. Each subprogram specifies one or more actions to be performed from a large program. Subprograms are called subroutines or modules. Now, let us see the syntax of a function. So I have shown the syntax of the function here. So it consists of a function header and a function body. So the first line in the program is called as a function header, and the part that is present within this curly brackets is called as a function body. So this is the general format of a function. In the first line, which heads the function, is known as function header, and this function header should not end with a semicolon. So we should not end with a semicolon. Here we should not write a semicolon. The function body following the function header is always enclosed in the curly brackets. So we need to enclose in the curly brackets. So here the body of the function is combination of declarations and executable statements. Here the same statements describe the actions to be performed by the function. So the body of the function definition is also called as block of code or set of statements. Why we use a function? The main advantage of using function is that they allow us to break a large complex task into a series of smaller ones. Smaller functions are easier to code because entire effort can be directed to the task at hand. Using functions removes the need to duplicate code. A function may be used any number of times by any number of other programs requiring similar tasks to be performed. Debugging is generally simple with functions. Use of functions generate modular programming. This is one of the objective of good structured programming. Use of functions tends to make more efficient use of memory. So by using functions, it avoids us to rewrite the same code over and over, and using functions, becomes easier to write a program and keep track of what they are doing. So these are the things that gives us advantage while we use the functions. So let us see how these functions going to work. Once a function is defined and called, it takes some data from the calling function and returns the value to the called function. Whenever a function is called, control passes to the called function, and after the work is being completed, so it will again return back to the calling function. When the execution of the calling function is completed, the control returns back to the calling function and executes the next statement in the calling function. So the values of the actual arguments passed by the calling functions are being received by the formal arguments of the called function. The number of actual and formal arguments should be the same. If the formal arguments are more than the actual arguments, then the extra arguments appears as garbage. You can give more arguments, but it will consider it as a garbage. Whereas if you are changing the type of the arguments, then it will give the error. So the function operations on formal arguments and sends back the result to the calling function. Now let us see what is calling function and what is a called function. So the function which is referring another function is called calling function, and the function which is being referenced by another function is called as a called function. And the arguments or the parameters of the calling function are called as an actual arguments, and the arguments in the called function are called as an formal arguments. Now we are going to use variables. These variables can be of local variables or global variables. So what are local variables? Local variables are defined within the body of the function or the block. So whatever the variables we are using in the body of the functions, those variables cannot be used by the other functions. Whereas coming to the global variables are defined outside the main function. So multiple functions can use these global variables. So finally, local variables are defined inside the function. Local variables are created at the time of function call and destroyed when the function execution is over. Local variables are accessible only to that particular function. Whereas coming to global variables are defined outside the function. Global variables are created at the time of program beginning and resides until the end of the entire program. Global variables are accessible in the entire program. Now let us see the different types of functions. Basically there are two types of functions. One is called library functions and the other one is user defined functions. The library functions are also called as predefined functions or built-in functions, system defined functions. And the next one is user defined functions. So let us see the first one, that is the library functions or built-in functions or predefined functions. Built-in functions are predefined functions and supplied along with the compiler, and these can be used in any C program. So these functions are also called as library functions, and all these functions are available in the C library. So, for example, let us take printf, scanf, getters, square root, etc., etc. So, for example, if we take the square root, it is a mathematical library function which is used for finding the square root of any number. The functions like scanf and printf are input-output library functions. Similarly, we have string compare, string length, string reverse, string concatenate. So, string n compare. So, all these are string manipulation functions. Thus, to use these library functions, to use these built-in functions, we have to include some header file using the preprocessor directive #include. For example, to use an input-output function like printf and scanf, we have to include stdio.h. For math library functions, we have to include math.h. For using clear screen, we need to use conio.h. For using string libraries, we need to include string.h header file. So, these are the different library functions. Next, coming to user-defined functions. So, a user can create his own functions for performing any specific task. So, here the functions defined by the user are called as an user-defined functions. The main function is an user-defined function, and printf, scanf, square root are library functions. The main function invokes other functions within it, and printf, scanf, and square root are invoked by the main functions. So main is called calling function, and remaining are known as called functions. So a function that invokes another function is known as calling function. A function which is invoked by another function is known as called function. The called function may be a calling function for another function. So in C, main is the first calling function in any C program. It is special function which tells the compiler to start the execution of the C program from the beginning of the function main. It is not possible to have more than one main function because the compiler will not know where to start the execution in such situations. So here in the user-defined functions, to create an user-defined functions, we have three elements. Those are function declaration, function definition, and function call. Function declaration. This function declaration is also called as a function prototype. So whenever a function is invoked in another function, it must be declared before use. Such a declaration is known as function declaration or function prototype. And always this function declaration need to be above the main function. So before the main itself, we need to declare. And one thing, you can declare the function. If you are only declaring the function, after the syntax, after the declaration of the function, you need to put a semicolon. If you are declaring along with the definition, then there should not be a semicolon at the end of the function header. Okay. So here, it provides the following information to the compiler. So when we declare the function, it provides some information to the compiler. The information what it is going to provide to the compiler is what is the name of the function, what is the type of the return value by that particular function, and what are the number and type of parameters that must be supplied to call the function. So function prototype is one of the key feature added to the C function. When a function call is encountered, the compiler checks the function call with its prototype. So the correct parameter types are used. The compiler informs the user about any violation in the actual parameters that are passed to the function. So the function prototype is a declaration which has the syntax return value, function name, followed by list of arguments. Okay, next function body. We are going to write the function body within the curly brackets. So here, let us see what is a function definition. So a function definition describes what a function does, how its actions are achieved, and how it is used. So basically the function definition consists of two parts. One is function header and the other one is function body. So the general format of the function is shown here with an example: int sum of int x comma int y. So here sum is the name of the function. Sum is the name of the function. Whereas int x and int y are the parameters of the function that are enclosed within the parentheses. And the return type is integer. So it is going to return a value of type integer. And whenever we write the body of the function need to be written within the curly brackets. So the function body need to follow the function header, and it is always enclosed within the curly brackets. The body of the function is a combination of declarations and executable statements. Here the executable statements describes what are the actions that need to be performed on the function. So the body of the function definition is also known as a block or a compound statement. One thing what you need to remember is whenever you are giving a function definition, there should not be any semicolon after the function header. So int sum of int x comma int y, semicolon is not acceptable. You cannot put a semicolon after the function header. So that is a key point what we should note, and that is the mistake many programmers at the initial stages they do. So we need to keep it in mind. Next one is function call. So in order to use the function, we need to invoke it at a required place in the program. This is known as a function call. So we have defined the function, we have declared the function, we have defined the function, and if we are not calling that function, then there is no use in declaring and defining the function. So whenever we require whatever the function we have declared and whatever the function we have defined, that function we need to call at the required places in the program. Now let us see the different categories of the function. A function, depending on whether the arguments are present or not and whether the value is returned or not, may belong to any one of the following four categories. One is the function with no arguments and no return values, the functions with arguments and with no return values, functions with arguments and with return values, functions with no arguments and no return values. Now let us see the first example, that is functions with no arguments and no return values. So there is no data communication between the calling portion of the program and the called function block. So this is the called function block and this is the calling program. So here there will not be any communication between the calling program and the called function block. So the function is invoked by a calling environment. So here I am calling the function. I am calling the function. So this is what is called as an calling function. So in this calling function, I am calling the function 2. So what is function 2? Function 2 is nothing but it is a called function. since I am calling function 2 in this function 1 is called as an calling function and function 2 is called as an called function. And if you can see here, the arguments in this particular function 2 is null. So there are no arguments, means the functions are not having any arguments. And you can also see that it is not having any return value. So it is having no return value. So this is a data communication. No data communication happens between the function 1 and function 2. Now let us see a small example program to find the largest maximum of 3 numbers. So here I have given a program in that we can see that void maximum. So here whenever I am defining the function along with the declaration, we cannot keep this particular semicolon. To show that only I have put this semicolon. So here the semicolon cannot be used if we are going to declare the function at the time of a definition only. While defining only, if we are declaring the function, then we cannot use this particular semicolon. So here the maximum function is having 3 numbers. Its header indicates that it requires no arguments and it does not return any value. In the body of the function, 4 variables are declared x, y, and z and collect the 3 numbers. Maximum is used to collect the maximum of them. Max is used to collect the maximum of them. The statement which follows accepts the 3 numbers. So here we are going to accept the 3 numbers and then find the maximum of the 3 numbers, then display the maximum. Whereas the actual program starts in the main function. So in the main function, maximum is invoked by just specifying the name and pair of parentheses. So where the actual execution starts, the actual execution starts and ends with the main. So here it will start here and it will end here. In between we have just called the maxima function. What will happen? The control will, whenever I have invoked this particular maximum function, the control will go to void maximum. So it will start executing from here to here. Once after completing this entire maximum function, the control will return to getCH. So in this particular place, what I have taken, I have accepted the 3 numbers and I have calculated which is the maximum value and I have printed. So once after printing, it will be waiting for any character to be typed on the keyboard and we will get this particular result. Now let us see the second one, that is functions with arguments and with no return values. So the second type of user defined functions passes some formal arguments to the function, but the function does not return back any value to the calling function. It is an one-way communication between the calling portion of the program and the called function block. So here if you can see, this is the calling function. Function 1 is the calling function. It is calling what function? Function 2 it is calling. While it is calling the function 2, it is having one variable as an argument. So this is called as an actual parameter. Since it is calling with arguments, so here it will send that x value into this particular a. So what is a? A is nothing but it is called as an formal parameters. So I am calling the function with some arguments in it. But here you can clearly see that it is not returning any value. So it has no return value. So this is an one-way communication between the function and this is the second type. Now let us see the same example of finding out the maximum of 3 numbers in this. Here see I have shown the difference. Here I have declared. Here I have declared the function. There is no function definition. So where is the function definition? The function definition is after void main. So I have defined the function after the main. Just only what I have done is I have done the declaration. So when I have declared the declaration, compulsorily there should be an semicolon after that declaration. So here you can see that there are three arguments in this particular function, and it is not having any return type. Since it is not having any return type, I have put it as a void. So here void says that it is not having any return type, no return type, but it is having three arguments. If you can see here clearly, the three arguments are of type integer. They are of type integer. I have not given the names to the variables. Since I have not given the names to the variables here at the time of definition, here I can use any name. So those in the definition section, int A, int B, int C. If I have given here place int L, int M, int N, then I need to use the same names here. Okay, since I have not given any name, just I have mentioned its type, I have an advantage of giving any name what I feel to give. Okay, so here the function program is going to start with the main itself. So here the function main, we have x, y and z are declared to be variables of type integer. Initially the values of x, y, z are accepted, and the function maximum is called by the passing the values of x, y, z. So I have called the maximum function by passing the x, y, z values. As maximum of x, y, z value I called, the control will go here. So when the control goes here, the x value will be going into A, y value will be going into B, and z value will be going into C. Here the x, y, z are called as an actual parameters. Int x, int y and int z are called actual parameters, whereas int A, int B, int C are called as an formal parameters. So in this maximum function, I have defined three arguments A, B, C. They are also of type integer. The arguments A, B, C are called formal parameters of the function maximum. The purpose of this function is to find the maximum of the three values passed to it. So here the main goal is to find out the maximum of the three numbers. So here I have taken one more variable max. So into that max, I have passed the initial value of A. Then I have checked whether B is greater than max. If B is greater than max, the max value is considered to be B. Or else I am checking whether C is greater than max. So if C is greater than max, then I am putting the C value into the max. So based on that, I am printing the max value. So once after printing, the function is ended. So it will come to get char. So the result will be displayed in this particular format. So in both the cases, the output will resemble one and the same. Now let us see the third category, that is functions with arguments and with return type. So it is a two-way communication. We are going to send the input, at the same time we are going to get the output. So here it will calling function will call the function with arguments, and the called function will return the value. Okay, so here the third type of user defined function passes some formal arguments to the function from a calling portion of the program, and the computed value, if any, is transferred back to the caller. So data are communicated between the calling portion of the program and the called portion of the called function block. That's why there is a two-way data communication between the functions. So now let us see that with the same example of finding out the maximum of three numbers. So here also you can see I have declared the function. Since I have only declared the function, I have used the semicolon here. Now the function will start with void main. So here the void main is having three variables, and these three variables are being accepted. So x, y, z, we are accepting the values of the values x, y, z, and those are being passed into maximum. So max of xyz. So what is xyz? Xyz are called as an actual parameters. And at the time of declaration itself, I have said int x, int y, int z. So in the definition section, 100% there should be x, y, z. We cannot take it a, b, c like in the previous example, because already I have said that it will have the variable x of type integer, it will have the variable of type y which is of integer, it will have variable z which is of type integer. So whatever the names I mentioned, I should have the same mentions here. So if you cannot remember the names, what you need to do, instead of giving xyz, you need to say int. If you say int, you will be in a safe position. You can use as the name whatever you like, you can give it at the time of definition while defining the function. Now when you call this the maximum function, what is happening? It is coming, the control will come to this place. So the x value will come into this x value. So the actual value will come into the formal x value. The y value will come into this y value, and the z value will come into this z value. See, here you need to understand, whenever you are calling a function, the function is going to create a frame, separate frame for each and every function in that particular program. Since main is one function, main will have one frame. In that frame you will be having x value, y value, z value, and max I value. So there will be a separate memory for each of the values. When you call a maximum of xyz, since this is a function, again it will create a separate frame for maximum of xyz. In that again you will have variable x, variable y, variable z, and variable max. So separate memory. So both these memories are not one and the same. So this xyz will lie somewhere in the memory, and this xyz will reside at some place in the memory. So both are not the one and the same, both are separate. So for each and every function what we are going to use in the program, it will create a separate frame and a separate place it will allocate for storing its values, variables, functions, whatever it may be. So here also, when I have called maximum of xyz, the control will come to here. It will pass this x value to here, this y value to this y, this z value to this z. Then I have created one more variable max. What I am doing, I have assigned the similar case x value to the max, and if y is greater than max, then I am passing the value of y to the max. If y is not greater than max, then the max value will contain the x only. Then it will check whether z is greater than max. If z is greater than max, into the max it will send the z value. If z is also not greater than max, then the maximum value will contain x value only. Then what it will do? It will return the maximum value. So when it returns the maximum, so here the maximum function, what it is going to return? It is going to return the integer. And what is max? Max is also an integer. So whatever the value it is returning, that will come and store in maxi. What is maxi? Maxi is once again an integer variable. So the value what is being returned by this maximum function will be stored in the maxi. Now what I am doing, maximum is equal to percentage d, I am printing that maxi value. So what is that the return value? The return greatest of the three numbers 1 to 3 is 3. So that 3 is returned into the max A and that value is being printed. So this is the third format category, that is functions with arguments and with no return value. Now let us see the fourth type, that is functions with no arguments and return value. So it will not, the calling function will not call the function with any arguments, and the called function, but the called function what it will do, it will return the value output. So here you are calling the function without any arguments, but the called function will return the value to the calling function. So here also a one-way data communication happens. Here the fourth type of user-defined function, the function is invoked by a calling environment by not passing any formal arguments to the function, but the computed value, if any, is transferred back to the caller. So data or communication between the calling portion of the program and the called function block in one way. That's the reason it is called as an one-way communication. That is, you are not going to give any input, but you are going to accept the result. Now let us see the same program for finding out the maximum of three numbers here with no arguments but with the return type. Since it is having a return type, at the time of declaration itself I have said that it is of type integer. So it is going to return an integer. So this is I have defined it. So at this point of time I have said that it is not having any arguments. Now int max, so the program is going to start at void main. It is having one variable of type max. Clear the screen. Since you have used conio.h, you can clear the screen. Max is equal to maximum. Once when you call the maximum function with no arguments, the control will come here, and it is having four variables int x, y, z and max. So the printf enter the three numbers. You have accepted the three values, that is x, y, z values. X is 1, y is 2, z is 3. Now maximum is equal to 1. So since x value is 1, maximum is equal to 1. Y is greater than max. 2 is greater than 1. So the maximum value will become 2. Again this it will check with z. Z value is 3. 3 is greater than 2. True. So maximum is equal to 3. So now the z value, maximum value, what is there? 3. That 3 value, what I am doing, I am returning. So that returned value will fall into this max. This max is a different and this max is the difference, because whenever you invoke any new function, it will create a separate frame, separate memory for each and every variable in that particular function. And once after completion of that particular function, it will delete, it will erase the memory. So the local variables, that is where we have seen the local variable and global variable concept. So this x, y, z and max are local to this particular function, so you can use only here. And this max is the variable what I have created in the max function. So this max is different with this max. To say that only, I have given all the four different programs which are performing the same task but with different formats. So here it will print the maximum value. So this is the four different categories. Now let us see what is called as a parameter passing. So the parameter passing, so here whatever the arguments we are writing in this functions, those are called as an arguments, and the other name for the arguments is parameters. So while passing these parameters, the passing of parameters can be done in two ways. One is called pass by value and the other one is called as an pass by reference. Pass by value can also be called as call by value, and pass by reference is called as a call by address. So one is pass by value or call by value. The second one is pass by reference or call by address. Let us see what is pass by value. In this, the method calling function sends a copy of actual value to the calling function. So whatever the function that is calling, that calling function will send the actual values to the called function. And the called function, whatever the arguments that are available, those arguments are called as an formal parameters. And if we are making any changes in using these formal arguments, that is not going to reflect the original values. That is not going to reflect the actual parameters. Then we say that the procedure is call by value. Suppose if it is pass by reference or call by address, in this method the calling function sends address of the actual values as parameters to the calling functions. So in the calling function, whatever the arguments we are using, at that arguments we are going to send the address. And whenever we send this, so the called function performs its tasks and sends the result back to the calling function. So what will happen whenever you send the address to the through the calling function to the called function, the called function, whatever the modifications it is going to make, that is going to reflect the actual parameters, because you are giving the address and you are calling the function. Thus the changes in the called function reflects the original values of the calling function. To return multiple values from called to calling function, we use the pointer variable. Suppose if you want to return more than values, multiple values, then you will be using the pointer concept that we will see in the pointers concept. So whenever you are using the calling functions, the calling functions need to pass ampersand operator along with the actual arguments, and the called functions need to use asterisk star operator along with the formal arguments. Changing data through an address variable is known as indirect access, and pointer asterisk is represented as indicator operator. Now let us see each one more elaborately. The first one is pass by value or call by value. So what is pass by value or call by value? Function calls by value is a default way of calling the function in C program. Before we discuss function call by value, let us understand the terminology that we use while explaining this. That is actual parameters and formal parameters. What are actual parameters? Actual parameters are the parameters what we are going to write in the function call. And formal parameters are the parameters that are in the called function. So whatever we are declaring, parameters we are declaring in the called function, those parameters are called as an formal parameters. And while calling whatever the parameters we are using, those parameters are called as an actual parameters. So when we pass the actual parameters while calling the function, then this is known as function call by value. In this case, the values of the actual parameters are copied to the formal parameters. Thus, operation performed on the formal parameters does not reflect the actual parameters. So, if you are using by call by value method, and if you are calling a function, whatever the changes you are going to do in the called function, that are not going to reflect the values that are available in the calling function parameters. Actual parameters are not going to have any effect. So call by value. In this parameter passing method, values of the actual parameters are copied to the function formal parameters, and the two types of parameters are stored in different memory locations. So I have said that whenever we are creating a memory, whenever we are calling a function, a separate frame is going to get created. So they will have separate memory location. So any changes made inside these functions are not going to reflect it in the actual parameters of the caller. So this is what is called as an call by value. Now let us see what is pass by reference or call by address. Here also we should be clear whenever we are talking about call by reference or call by value, we need to understand what is actual parameter and what is formal parameter. So the parameters that appear in the function call is called as an actual parameters. The parameters that appear in the function declaration is called as an formal parameters. So here in this particular case, when we call a function by passing the address of the actual parameters, so we are calling a function by giving the address. Since we are giving the address of that particular in the calling function, what will happen? Whatever the changes or whatever the modifications we are doing in the called function, that are going to affect the actual parameters. So the modifications are going to take place in the actual parameters, since we are calling that particular function by using the address. Since we are giving directly the address and we are doing changes, that what the modifications are going to reflect the actual parameters. So this is what is called as an call by address. So in call by reference or call by address, both the actual and formal parameters refers to the same location. So any changes made inside the function are actually reflected in the actual parameters of caller. So this is what is called as call by reference or call by address. We will see in depth about call by value and call by reference and the remaining part of this passing arrays to functions, storage classes and recursive functions in our next section. Thank you very much.